How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to part 3 of our training video of 10 for reactionary to reputation. So what we are teaching right now is being modeled from this book right here. It's available on Amazon as an ebook. It's from Reaction to Reputation, a Rookie's Correctional Officer's Guide to Discretion, Authority, and Earning Command Presence. As again, we are on number 3. If you guys haven't seen the first 2, I highly recommend it because we are going to continue moving forward. And today is going to be about the shifting point, procedural to purposeful. And this is where you start to see the rookie develop discretion. And this is key. But let me get Russ on. What up, Russ?
Good morning, Anthony. How's it going?
Good. There's video 3, but let's keep on introducing yourself because we got to do it every video. So, Russ, if you don't mind, would you please introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer, and I currently work for a company that does reentry and rehabilitation work with a local county jail and a local probation department where I have a caseload. And let's see what else. I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos. That's with Chaos with a K, and that is on Facebook. And we provide, mentorship and guidance and training and content and knowledge and fellowship for anyone and everyone that works inside the field of corrections.
Yes. Now, guys, remember, we went from reactionary. So just a little summary real quick is basically reactionary. The rookie's going to be very controlled by the situation. Basically, they're leaning on policy and procedure, very black and white for them. They're going to lean on the leverage of maybe taking things away and the support that they get from those that are around them. Now, this next stage, this is going to see the birth of something very important, which is going to be discretion. But Russ, anything that you want to summarize real quick before we move into the shifting point?
No, but I think that, it should be stated, that there has to be a point in your career where you shift from the point where you are going along with the program and you're functioning within policy and procedure to actually, becoming the one that initiates things and that handles things, on your own with little or no input. And yet, you still are operating within that chain of command. But there's a point at which you must become much more autonomous when and if necessary.
Yeah, and that's the growth. Now, it's funny because, as we said, a lot of people do go through this growth, but maybe they haven't named it. So me and Russ have worked together to put the series, out there. So this is naming the growth in the process. So as I said, this is going to be the shifting point. This is where you move past procedural and start going to purposeful. And in today's day and age, there's got to be purpose behind the work because you cannot keep a rookie at that first stage forever. Now, granted, I mentioned in the other video, there will be times where you may have to kind of go back and forth between the stages, depending on the inmate. I mean, sometimes you're going to have to just become that reactionary person. But for the most part, you have to start moving towards those established expectations. So again, part 2, the shifting point. This is procedural to purposeful. And the statement I have here is eventually the rookie starts asking the most important question of all. Is what I'm doing actually working? And that question doesn't come during training, doesn't arrive in the classroom. It's not asked at a graduation ceremony, and it's certainly not answered during a policy review. It arrives in the silence after a shift where something didn't sit right. Maybe it's after the 3rd write-up of the day and nothing seemed to change. Maybe it's after a confrontation that escalated too quickly when the rookie realizes they were fueling the tension and not diffusing it. Or maybe it's after watching a senior officer diffuse that same type of situation with a quiet word and 0 paperwork. It's at that point, often weeks or months into the job, that the rookie begins to feel something subtle but powerful. Exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, though that's part of it, This is emotional exhaustion, the fatigue of constant conflict without meaningful progress. So they begin to wonder, is my way sustainable? Is this really what good control looks like? And why does this feel harder than it should? And that's when something critical begins to shift. And then we'll go into that next part, which will be from doing to deciding. But Russ, let's get our first question in real quick. First question I get right now is, why do you think this point of emotional exhaustion is often a turning point for growth rather than a breaking point? And can we prepare rookies to recognize it as that?
Well, that is really difficult. Here's what I'll say is that if you start out in the academy, and a lot do, some are sent to the academy, months after they actually start. But either way, you're going through this process, and the process can be a long and tedious one. And it's something that you end up where you're like approaching a point of finality where you at least feel like you're finished out and you're ready to do things on your own and you're taking initiative. But what comes along with that is a degree of what I would say is physical and emotional. Perhaps it's exhaustion. Perhaps it's just having had it so constant with you for weeks or perhaps months on end, and you add that into the mix with having to do some mandatory shifts and things, and a lot of people, well, I would say maybe all people, really still have not yet learned how to juggle that thing, how to go through those processes and be able to actually function in that type of high stress, high threat environment all of the time. So I think it's something that's expected, but it is just part of the maturing process. And so I think that's the best answer that I can give. I think it comes up a little bit short because, there's so much variation in what we do. There's so much variation in different departments, in different facilities, and all of that. But I think there is an expectation that people, when they're getting toward where they should be, they should be exhausted from the process.
Yeah, and Russ, I think this also makes sense. I want to elaborate a little bit more because what you're saying really triggered something in me too. So I think that when you're that rookie, you are going to run around with a lot of energy because there should be a want for you to learn the job. So that should keep you fueled. But again, if you keep on doing the reactionary side, you're fueled, but you're also feeling that you're being controlled. You're being pulled into different things, and then you're forced to react. And then what you do is you start looking at the more senior officers, and you start to see one thing, that they have more control, that things to them seem to be moving a bit more smoother because of that control. So now when I start looking at Russ and how he handles things, it's not that I'm looking for a shortcut, but I maybe I don't want to spend as much energy anymore. So now I'm looking to see how Russ handles things, and Russ has, again, that sense of control. Russ has that understanding of policy and procedure to the point where they know how to maneuver from it. I think when you're new, you're so afraid to kind of make a decision that kind of is in the unknown zone, if you will, because so far I've been doing things that are absolute. You violate policy, that's what it's going to be. You don't violate policy, I'll leave you alone. Okay, and that's, I get it. You started off that way. That's a great template. But now we have to get you towards that middle ground because you can't run on those absolutes throughout your whole career. So I think there is a moment of exhaustion. And I think the officer that's new does look to that senior officer. I don't want to say they look for an easier way, because I don't want people to misuse the word easy, but I will say to some extent, I won't even say convenient. I'll say a more efficient way so they're not burned out, because you can't do that for the rest of your career. And do you agree with that, Russ? Does that make sense?
Here's what I would say. most people, it takes a long time for them to get to the point where they understand the nuance of each situation that they're in. There are things that can only be solved by a high energy approach. You may have to start yelling at an inmate, telling them to get on the ground, pulling your pepper spray, getting ready to deploy force. Obviously, that's not the answer to every situation. But I just see a lot where, rookies, they don't know how to shift gears and to move situations along, depending on what's actually called for. And so sometimes what they do is they get hesitant because they are not sure, how much energy they should push into a situation, because the answer is not always necessarily more energy. Sometimes it's shifting gears and approaching things from a different point. That nuance and that understanding of it, and being able to not be a one-trick pony, takes a lot of effort. And therefore, perhaps that's where some of the exhaustion comes from, is just having to learn something that's more complex than a lot of people would believe.
Yeah, and it's good that we put a label on it now, because to be honest with you, if you're losing the senior staff, these are things you learned without realizing you're learning it. So now it's good for us to have that label, because we're kind of showing you, if you don't have that senior staff as a rookie, these are the things that you're supposed to be kind of leaning towards. And if you are senior staff and you maybe forgot about that, this is a good direction for the rookie. So that makes sense, because the next section I got here, Russ, makes sense. It's from doing to deciding. So you're no longer being controlled by the situation. Now you're taking a second to absorb it to some extent, and then starting to realize what is the best path for more long-term success. Because again, when you're reactionary, what are you doing? You're chasing after, but you're really not putting something in play to really handle it. And that's okay. At the very beginning, I get it. But now I don't want to be doing this every day. So that senior officer, the one thing that senior officer is doing that you're still in the process of hopefully going to be developing, is that long-term stamp, which is ultimately going to lead to that established expectation. So we got Russ here. Here's what we got. So up until now, the rookie has followed a straightforward formula. See the infraction, correct it, write it up if need be, move on. It's clean, mechanical, predictable. But the correctional environment is none of those things. The rookie begins to realize that black and white enforcement doesn't always work in a world of gray. They see that procedural consistency alone isn't producing the results they thought it would. And that moment of self-awareness, that flicker of discomfort, is actually the start of something powerful. Now we got judgment. Not the kind that shames or punishes, but the kind that guides decisions with purpose. So, Russ, how do we train judgment when it can't be taught like a policy? And what role does experience play? And can it be accelerated through mentorship or modeling?
Yeah, that's really a very good question. I think that the more situations that we're able to put rookies into, where they have to figure out what it is that they need to do, and they're able to have some successes and some failures, and they're able to take some of the things that they've done and put them against a background of, how could this have gone better? How could this have gone worse? And what is the final outcome of not fully operating within policy and procedure? I'm not saying violating policy and procedure, but operating in an area where things don't necessarily apply in that black and white area. This is where, we move maybe a little bit from discretionary decision making to critical thinking. And so that's what we really have to teach people. We have to teach them the critical thinking process. They have to be able to see multiple probable, not possible, but probable outcomes of the things that they do and the ways that they're doing them, and then be able to adapt and adjust their approach in a way that, helps balance out, the piece of the unit and the overall flow and efficiency in the way things are operating.
Yes, and I'm going to tell you something, Russ. This is essential. So hopefully more people are leaning into what we're discussing here. But for the question here, how do we train judgment when it can't be taught like a policy, whatever it is? It is like it's role modeling. Now, if you don't have the role model, I think it's labeling what we want that rookie to be and not expect them to figure it out on their own. So for the rookies that are watching this, that at one point you're going to have to move from reactionary to some level of discretion. Last thing I want is for a rookie to stay at this phase and try to manage this their whole career. So if you don't have the right role models, they may just stay at that initial phase. And that's not good because, again, you're going to burn yourself out. You need to not react all the time, but rather have control. And again, what does the role does experience playing? Can it be accelerated through mentorship or modeling? That's the best role if we have it. But again, we develop these videos because right now the complaints we're getting through the channel is that the senior role, they're just not there. Some are, but just not there like they used to be. And now the senior officers may not be that senior. They're a senior officer to you, but does it mean they're senior when it comes to experience? And ain't that a concern, Russ?
Yeah, because that's the point at which officers that are, what's a good word, are being seniorized. If they've got 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 years in, how great can all of that experience be? And it's going to be different for different people according to both the facility and their own personal abilities. But it's also a way that, blind spots can start to be developed because, they see it, through the complacency of success. It's been working. And so it will always work in every situation from now all the way into the future. That's not what happens inside correctional facilities. Success is great. But there's some point at which it will be tested beyond what you're used to, and something bad will happen. So, the more depth of experience that your senior staff have, the better off you are because they understand. Hey, you know what? It's great when we have success, but don't expect that is going to be the norm all of the time. There are going to be outlier events, and we are going to be put into positions where we are no longer successful. And so, the greater depth that we can maintain, the more, the more experience that we can inject into the process, the better off we are, which is one of the great things really about Tier Talk, because part of this is a preservation of the experience and hard fought, blood, sweat, and tears of many, many people who've done this job over decades and decades.
Yeah, and it was funny because when me and Russ were kind of discussing the other day of when we entered the career, we were working next to people. Like for me, if I was working people towards the end of their career, I've actually interacted with people that have worked in this profession in the mid to late 70s, unless they had an extended career, then it even goes further back. Russ is somewhere in the 60s, correct, Russ? And we don't have those type of old school lessons now.
Yeah, we don't. I had I had people working around me that had been present even at Black August, and so that reaches way back, early 70s, late 60s. And so those people now obviously are more or less gone. There may be a few still hanging around. And I think that we've lost a lot of that experience, has just gone away. I'm hoping, over the next course of things to happen, that, maybe social media will really truly help plug some of those holes. Some of this stuff may linger about, for many, many decades, even after we're gone. And maybe, or I should say at least hopefully, it will provide some value to some people.
Yeah. And guys, I accidentally hit the wrong button when I went to unmute it. And guys, if you look at some of the older shows of Tier Talk, we had some guests on. I mean, a lot of them are long since retired. So we do have a little bit of some legacy in this channel as well, like Russ said. So I want to talk a little bit now about what the stage looks like. So again, it's the shift. It's the turning point. It's when the rookie's looking around, realizing that maybe there's a more efficient way, but more importantly, more long-term. So you'll notice, okay, so in this shifting point, behaviors doesn't just change, it's matured. It matures. So this is what you're going to notice in the rookie. So this is good also for the senior officers to be watching. The tempo slows down, not in efficiency, but in emotional reaction time. They're no longer sprinting towards every problem with urgency. They're learning to read the situation first. They pause before reacting. Instead of writing up the inmate for a late stand-up, they pause. Why did that happen? Was it a refusal, or was the inmate lost in thought? They seek modeling. Senior officers who once faded into the background now stand out. They begin noticing how veterans de-escalate without ego, how they intervene without overreacting. Hey, I want to mention something before I want to move forward, Russ, but just keep in the back of your mind. I think this is extremely important because they seek modeling. So this is where they may want to seek modeling a little bit more, because now they're trying to see maybe there is a better way to do it. So maybe there's even a moment where they feel it in themselves that, you know what, let me go look at other people. And now if you had a rookie that came in that wasn't as humble and they wanted to come in like the Terminator, now maybe this gives them a chance to revisit some of the senior officers who they thought as maybe being a bit lax, without realizing that, no, they're running things as what we would talk about later, established expectations. And then I got, so they become curious. They become curious, not just cautious. Instead of reacting from fear, they begin asking, what is the best move here? Not just the fastest one. That's the balance that we're trying to talk about. And they stop trying to win moments and start trying to shape outcomes. In this phase, the officer is transitioning from rule compliance to leadership awareness. They haven't abandoned enforcement. They're refining it. Now, the question here, Russ, is have you seen officers who got stuck in compliance but never reached this maturing stage? And what prevented their growth? And how can leadership spot and support those stuck in this rut?
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty common thing that happens. It may be, for a fixed period of time where they're actually able to move beyond it, and some of them never do. Some of these people are what I might refer to as the one-trick ponies. They only know how to deal with difficult situations by doing X, Y, and Z, or maybe it'd be more appropriate to say by doing A, B, and C, because they never learned D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, and so on. I think that it's really important. We talk about the role modeling and so forth. Up to my last day and even beyond, I always looked at people to see what I could take from their repertoire, and would never stop learning. And I would think, man, I like the way he did that with that particular inmate. How can I model that in some way or use that where it applies to me? Sometimes some things other people do are a good fit for my style, sometimes not. But sometimes they can be adaptive. So continuing to push people to gain the skill sets they need to become more and more polished and more refined is always what we want to be doing. But then, we're not necessarily always in charge of what another person is actually capable of doing. Some people are just not going to mature, and we have to be able to find things that they can better fit into if they're not going to move outside the job. Sometimes I would call them specialists. They do serve good functions. They're really good at doing one or two things, and maybe they're even exceptional at it. And we can learn from those people too, because there are some things that we can model because they are exceptional at doing some things. Mostly, though, I would say, we want everyone to be as well-rounded as possible. and able to, pick up on nuance and be able to handle every situation in a multitude of different ways.
Yeah. And that's the ultimate goal. And guys, I want to mention, as I kind of touched on it before, there will be moments in your career where you are going to find yourself going from established to reactionary. I mean, there are some inmates that can really pull you back a little, but there's more control because ultimately you understand what the long-term objective is going to be. So you go in with a little bit more direction. I think the rookies at first, they're just playing the reaction role. I don't know if they understand what the long-term objective is going to be. And then when they start seeing it, now there's a little bit more direction into what they're doing. And then there is purpose. So I like that. You're going from procedural to purposeful. And as a leader, if you see your officers going through this and they're not pulling themselves out of it, you need to address that. I've seen a lot of senior officers that are so defined by policy that when I was a rookie, I admired them. They could quote policy like you wouldn't believe, and man, did I admire them, and I wanted to be like them because I was in that phase where that was the most important way of enforcing the rules. But now that I've grown up in this profession a little bit more, and I know there's a lot of gray, I start to look back at those officers and in some cases see a little bit of them being a bit rigid where they were kind of lost when things didn't fit into policy. So they had knowledge, don't get me wrong, and that's great. You always need knowledge, so I'm not downplaying that part, but they let that knowledge define every bit of their action to the point where if they didn't have an answer that related to that knowledge, they would freeze. They really would freeze. And I also see something else that may not apply to everyone, but for some that define themselves by policy and procedure, they also may be deferring a sense of responsibility when it comes to decision making, because sometimes a decision a decision defined by policy, right, or by the procedure of that policy may not always apply. And you got to understand that's where discretion may live, but you may find people that are so rigid that they'll lean back on that and say, well, I'm sorry, that's what policy says. That's what policy says. That's what policy says. Oh, okay, I know that. I could read and memorize too, but it didn't fit here. So I again, at the very beginning, I'm loving these type of officers. But then there were some later on that I realized, wow, I think some of them that really were so willing to brag about their knowledge were also individuals that really didn't move past that and utilize discretion. So, and again, there's a balance there because by all means, I'm not saying they're not good. There are some that utilize that and it becomes a hell of a foundation for discretion, for purpose. But there are some that actually use that and stay there and there is no discretion. They lead on absolute. Does that make sense, Russ?
Yeah, I think it really does because I know exactly the type of officer that you're talking about, and they can be great functionaries in certain ways, but they're not necessarily the tool for every single job. Like I say, I think that it's more important to have a well-rounded officer if you can get them. But sometimes we're at our own limits inside of corrections, as it were.
And I want people to understand one thing when the rookie is going through this phase. The initial moment where they're trying to figure out another way, lean away from the absolute, from the black and white, but still within the context of the black and white, takes tremendous courage. So you got to be very careful if just in case they make a mistake, how you go ahead and work with them. So again, as a leader, be careful when they start to make that choice. And if it doesn't go the right way, be careful how you address them. You want to keep them encouraged because this part here, if you get a rookie that's addressed in the wrong way, they're never going to utilize discretion again. That's how vulnerable they are in this moment. And would you agree to that, Russ? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think some people can they can take even constructive criticism, let alone just plain criticism, and use it as a foil to not have to engage in the more difficult aspects of the work, which is that discretionary decision making and the critical thinking skills.
Now, guys, this coming up right now is the midway of where we need the officer to be, but this is probably the most important thing that we're going to discuss through all 10 videos. I'm not downplaying the importance of what we're discussing here, but this is what it's about. And it's about the birth of discretion. Do I need to write this? I kind of kept that a little bit simplistic there, but so there's a phase that starts circulating in the officer's mind. Not everything needs to be written. At first, this thought feels risky, maybe even wrong. After all, the rookie was taught that accountability lives in documentation. But now they're realizing that impact doesn't always live on paper. So instead of automatically reaching for the pen, they start asking, is this a pattern or a single lapse? Will writing this up actually correct the behavior? Would a conversation be more effective? Will this formal action escalate more than it educates? So we got direction now. We got long-term thinking. Now, this is called front-end discretion. I utilize that. This is the front-end discretion part. The decision-making power on the front side of enforcement. And it is one of the most critical tools an officer will ever develop. Now, here's the question, Russ. This is good, guys. This is discussions that are not being had that should be had because we need to fill this gap. So, Russ, when does discretion shift from being seen as weak to being recognized as wise? And what I said about that is, if you have an officer that decides not to write up an inmate, some people will say, well, you're being too soft, but they could be also trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And I wanted to make sure I put that out there because I know that there's some rookies that are thinking, if I don't write that inmate up, how I'm going to be viewed by those who are going to judge me thinking I'm weak when they're actually trying to develop a better way of enforcement. And so again, when does discretion shift from being seen as weak to being recognized as wise? That's important. And how do we help rookies get there without second guessing themselves?
So, one of the things that I think that we should, take under consideration on a day-to-day basis is we're actually generally, or should be at least, operating under a more long view of things. I think that some people get caught up in doing things on the immediate level, which it's true. There are many times that we do have to operate at that immediate level. But when you take, the long approach and being able to see maybe a little bit of what works, what doesn't work, and what actually sometimes can impede the process. If we were to look at things from extremes, for instance, if we were going to say, oh, no, you have to write every single person up, what would the outcome of that be? We would have officers writing paper all the time, clogging up a process that doesn't necessarily work all the time anyway. And we would be taking people away from doing tasks and missions that are far more critical than just some facet of the disciplinary process. And so if you took all that into consideration, you would immediately paper bound the entire institution, and you would stop actually from catching things in progress that are certainly perhaps felonies, violent acts, escape attempts, because you would be dealing with the minutia of the things that are immediately detectable. So yes, exactly. And so when I get to that point right there, then I'm saying, no, you have to absolutely be able to function at a higher level and not necessarily get dragged down into that minutia.
Yeah, that's good, Russ. That's really good. I don't think we've ever even shared that on our channel before. So this is great that these topics bring, because you figure we got over 1,700 something videos, man. And if anybody could give us credit for something, man, we talk about so many different topics that are not discussed anywhere else. So to put a video like this, especially for training guys, you got to hold on to this, because I don't know if anybody at this point understands how powerful this dialogue is. I mean, here's the funny thing: we all could do it. We just don't know it exists in us until someone asks you the right question. I mean, it's true. Our knowledge is based on the question that's asked. Now, for me, it goes: when does discretion shift from being seen as weak to being recognized as wise? For the rookie officer's perspective, I will say when they start seeing it being utilized, when they're open to seeing that. Because maybe they may feel power comes from reactionary methods of just writing up everything because they are caught in that initial phase, which makes sense. And then now when they're living on that absolute, anybody who gives an inmate a break could be seen as weak because it makes sense, right? I'm trying to build this and be tough and whatever it is, the overcorrecting, whatever you do to try to, hold on to that bit of authority at the very beginning. And then when you see an officer who's utilizing discretion on the extremes, right? One looks weak, the other one looks stronger. So, but when the rookie starts to get tired out, when they, these are the rookies that may not be as humble at the very beginning. Hopefully some that already go in willing to learn, they get balanced a little bit more quicker. But there are some that may go in and try to feel that they know everything and they're going to go in aggressive and be that, that Johnny on the spot or be that Terminator. And then they look at the officer, the senior officer who may give a break and without context, that officer is weak. I don't want to be them. And then next thing you know, maybe there's a point where they're tired, they're a little burned out. And for the first time in their early career, they look at that senior officer, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Like, why am I leaving today after a year? My hair's all fucking wild. I'm all over the place. And this rookie and this senior officer's a bit more calmer. So I think they have to recognize that in themselves that it's not that you're giving the inmate a break. And again, we're talking about non-emergency. We're talking about things that you could utilize discretion. Let's just get that out there. Like Russ said, we're talking about the things that are discretionary efforts. And then you look at that senior officer and you're like, wow, maybe there is a bit of a better way, but you first have to recognize that it's not weak. So you do have to kind of step back a little from that reactionary stage, from that absolute, and start to see that there's a middle ground. And all because you're in the middle ground doesn't mean you're compromised, and it means you're flexible. It means I'm flexible in how I have to manage, because I have to realize one thing. Because here's the one thing in reactionary stage that's going to be a bit different where we're at now, is you're going to start to realize that the situations vary and you don't have a catch-all. So, maybe that reactionary stage gives you some safety and a catch-all. But as you start to develop and more mature in your decision-making, you're going to realize you don't have a catch-all. And you're going to have to realize there's got to be ways to maneuver, because if you utilize this catch-all, then yes, there are going to be times where it won't work, and there'll be times where maybe it will. But there'll be times where it could be too extreme. And at this point here, maybe there would be a better way, because in my effort to resolve it, why did it escalate? Maybe there's another way I could approach it. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're starting to become a little bit more strategic. And then it says, and how do we help rookies get there without second guessing themselves? All right. Russ, I got to have your thoughts on this one. I'm going to say this. And this is tough because we have a lot of younger people in the profession that are moving up a bit quicker, or that are becoming senior a bit quicker. But I still have to say that this is the answer. And this is why we're putting these videos out there. Hopefully we have senior officers that do have experience. But once you feel the rookie is kind of understanding the authority and understanding, how conflict works, and you feel that they've proven enough to stand on their own and defend their position, I think the rookie has to be exposed to discretion a little bit more and from senior staff, and let them know that this isn't a sign of weakness. Because for me, when I was a rookie, I used to think that there were other ways to solve a problem. But if I did not go for the immediate write-up, I was afraid that I was going to be judged by my peers who were always, writing it up. Well, what did policy say? What did policy say? And what did policy say? It's like, well, maybe I saw something different. Maybe I'm trying to build some level of expectation with the inmate. So here, maybe this was a chance for me to do it. Maybe I needed them to try to cross the line a little bit so I can establish something, if that makes sense. Because, at the very beginning, ain't that what you're doing? You're establishing your line. So sometimes you need an inmate to some extent safely cross the line a bit so you can go ahead and reinforce it. What's your thoughts, Russ? Would you agree?
Yeah. There just has to be, a point where, you're utilizing and leveraging what the inmate does or does not do in a way to put you into a position to actually address what those issues are. And there's different ways to address them. I think that some staff, especially at the outset, may not understand that there are different ways to deal with things. We can give them verbal orders. We can, give them a little bit of, see, counseling, as it were. We can inform them as to what policy and procedure says, and we can also certainly become an issue for them by being in their business all the time, if that's what it takes. And I've done all of those things and more many times, and I think that too often the thing that's most canonized within policy and procedure is always the write-up approach. And so sometimes that's what our only focus is, because that's what we see, that's what we hear about, that's what's in black and white. And the discretion part of it is something that seems much more mysterious when you're at the beginning of your career.
Yep. And by the way, so this does come down. I mean, maybe I made it a little bit more simplistic, because obviously discretion is going to be utilized in almost every area of corrections. But I thought the most simplistic approach would be, again, regarding the write-ups. And we've done shows on this part of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of discretionary things that take place, but yeah, the write-up is probably or I should say, the disciplinary process is probably the one that you can point to and get examples from more easily than other areas.
Yeah, so that's why. So the next part here, Russ, is I don't need paper to lead. So let's be clear, not writing something up isn't the same as letting it slide. So that's good that we equate that. So if a rookie is being challenged by someone, if they're confident in what they've done, they can express it that way, because sometimes the rookie could be approached with someone that's rigid with policy. I mean, extremely rigid with policy. So it could become very confusing for a rookie when they try to utilize discretion. The first person that they meet is someone who in their own way is weak, just on the other side of it. You could be very weak when it comes to just only enforcing the policy to a point where it's absolute. So believe it or not, when I was a rookie, I saw that as strength. No, it could be that the person is afraid to make a decision. It's a little bit more hidden. So you have two sides of it all. But for those individuals, they hide it a bit better. They hide it under policy. So they hide it in the strength of reinforcing what's already written. So it's safe. And as a rookie, you're like, oh, wow, this person, really sticks by their guns. Well, yeah, because the decisions for them are written for them. That's not as challenging as people may think. At the very beginning, maybe. But when you have to start managing the gray, managing in that discretion, watch how those people start to move a little bit further out. And then watch how you start stepping up and see the shift. But again, it's something you don't realize at first. But I'm glad that we're able to have this discussion now, because this is something right here that we're teaching right now. It's not something you pick up on day one. It's something that you look back at and say, you know what, man, I remember this officer that I thought was amazing, that all they did was no policy. And that became their anchor. But then when you start being in corrections for so many years, you're thinking, man, policy and procedure don't cover everything. So, maybe that officer would get a bit lost if, what you needed, the situation fell outside of that. And that's where those discretionary efforts at. And don't get me wrong. Here's another part. If you're making the decision when things fall on the outside of policy and procedure, then that's the person you can give it back to if they want to go ahead and, clean it up for you. But you're the one that's doing the hard part. So you need people to know when to carry the ball and not wait for the ball to fall perfectly in line with what's written, because that doesn't happen by itself. So, okay, let's be clear. Again, so not writing something up isn't the same as letting it slide. It's a strategic choice to pursue the best form of accountability and not just the visible. That's key. And when used appropriately, front-end discretion sends a different kind of message to the inmate. You broke a rule, but I'm going to give you a chance to fix it with your behavior, not your record. I love that. I'm going to give you a chance to fix it with your behavior and not your record. That's a great line to give to the inmates. It builds the inmate accountable, not just to rule. Holds the inmate accountable, not just to rules, but to, and this is what we talked about, expectations. I'm a very big fan of managing through expectations. And expectations are often more powerful than consequences because they imply belief in the inmate's ability to choose better. And guys, don't downplay that. That has worked with me for a majority of my career for the inmates that are looking to do something better. That expectation carries a lot of weight. It's a struggle because the environment may not allow that expectation to exist. So you have to keep on pushing it, but it works. Now, this doesn't mean charges go away. It means charges are no longer the first or only option. And that's what separates procedural officers from a purpose-driven one. Now, Russ, here's the question here. In your experience, how do inmates respond to this kind of discretion? Do they respect it or try to exploit it? Obviously, probably both. And how should officers guard against the latter?
So I think that that's actually pretty easy in that, generally they'll respond to it well, unless their perception is, and of course their perception is often wrong, unless their perception is that, hey, I'm getting over because this guy is weak and he's not going to give me the write up. They'll almost always express some type of favorability, though, because they're not going to go there to your face generally. I won't say always, but generally. And so, the part how we guide against the latter and being exploited is with follow-up. And follow-up just means that, you know what, if the inmate's behavior has not changed or they continue to do what they've been warned against, or they've suffered something outside the realm of the write-up, then we just come back and we revisit that. And so that's part of the follow-through. And then at that point, we can just use that for further documentation, and to go ahead and let that process take place. The other thing, of course, that we can do is we can ratchet up what we've been doing outside that in addition to the write-up, and then maybe they won't be so keen as to try and exploit it after that.
I want to mention something on this part that I want to share something. This is a bit insightful, but this is where I could tell you where I believe this worked for me. When I first came into, and I may have shared this story before, probably within the same context, but when I first came into corrections, I was about 24, 25 maybe. So I'm trying to figure out how things roll. And I noticed that, you can't treat all inmates the same, obviously. There are some inmates who are going to test you a little bit more. And there are some inmates that, to be honest with you, some will work with you, some you just can't get to. It is what it is. And you have to really kind of know where you want to focus your energy on. And there were some where, okay, I'm going to do a little more for, because I feel that they're listening. And there's some that it's like there's going to be a different type of relationship with them, because this is just more of just being on them a little bit more and just getting ready to write them up, unfortunately, because there's no meeting them in the middle. So there was one inmate that actually had an impact on my career on who I wanted to be in this profession. And I'm going to admit that, because how I enforced my rules really mattered on how people receive them. And that matters to me today as a leader. So the people that were receiving my orders, that shaped in how I delivered them. And again, still who I am today. I still believe you can find a lot about somebody in how they treat the inmates at an initial level to see how they may become as they move up. Not all the time, but there's because you're coming with managing people. And I find that the people that are able to manage inmates pretty well, they could become and when I say balanced in managing people, they could become great leaders because they understand this dynamic about managing people that go way past, the specifics of the job. It's just they're able to manage people that, in my mind, could just be a gift. And I know Russ excels at that, myself, Joe, all of us have got some hidden talent that I believe that this profession has made us a lot better. And it's funny because people talk about leadership, and they go to these business people. Nah, come to us in corrections, because we lead people that don't want to be there, and not people that voluntarily want to grow. So, come to us. I know they may equate it to leading volunteers. No, come to us, because we lead every day at every level. So there was one inmate let me not be rude. She's no longer an inmate. She has done better, never came back into the system since she left. I'm actually extremely proud of this one individual. She came in, a bit lost, a bit young, did what she had to do to survive in there, had the struggles of going back and forth, but she truly did keep herself where she needed to be. And there was a lot of interactions that we had along the way where I was able to have some influence, but in the process, I was able to learn from her. And by the way, when you work in corrections, there's always could be a chance that you're vulnerable to counter influence. But if you know who you are and you stay steady in the course, it's not about counter influence. It's about learning how you need to adapt and adjust to what's in front of you without going too far down the path that you don't need to be. So there is a bit of adaptability, but it's controlled, because again, you have direction. So this is where I learned this tool, and it's in one of my books. I learned about expectation, which is actually what we're talking about now. And as I said, what I've written before is that I felt that if I was to go ahead and lead by write-ups and constantly, every time the person messes up, write them up, when they do good, they're not doing good for themselves. They're doing good for the rules. They're doing good for someone else. And in the long run, it may not matter to them how the prison feels about what they're doing, or it may not matter to them about what you feel about what they're doing. What matters to them is what they feel about themselves, and if it's taking them into a direction that they want to be in. So when I was enforcing the rules, when need be, and there was some level of discretion, I did try to utilize expectations that highlighted the growth of that individual. I tried to do it in a way that showcased potential, promise into where that person could be. And then you would see them make the struggle, because they knew at the end the reward of doing what was correct was for them. They knew it wasn't selfish in that way, but they just knew that it would open up doors for better things if and when they got released. So this was a great way to manage things. And also gave me a chance to get to know the inmates at some level that helped me manage their behaviors. That means that I took in their perspective because I was confident enough in my own. And that matters, because when you're at that point, when you're trying to manage individuals, you have to make sure that you maintain some level of distance with taking in that perspective. So again, I'm controlled. So I'm able to take in their perspective, figure it out without having to put on their shoes and becoming them and feeling highly sympathetic. It was a very easier route for me, because I maintained control, because I knew who I was, and I knew where I wanted to be. And then eventually, as you go through this, they do tend to turn around, and they do tend to do something good with their lives. And it's great when you interact with them for that last time. They thank you for what you've done. And then you find out that, through the grapevine, because prisons could be a very small world, but then you find out through the grapevine that they're doing excellent, that they never came back, and that they have a family of their own, and they made that choice to kind of continue the path that you may have sparked. And for those that are in corrections, you are a part of this change. You don't need permission to be a part of that change. You are a part of that change through every interaction. So you have to kind of choose which ones that you feel are worthy of a bit more energy, but still commit to the boundaries of what your prescribed role is. And helping an individual within your prescribed role is not always up to the people that are running the programs. I would actually say more so for the custody side, because you interact with them a bit more. So, okay, so that was a little bit of a story, but I think that was worth sharing. All right, Russ. So the next part I got, Russ, is the emotional weight of choosing not to write. So again, I kept it a little bit more simplistic with the write-ups, but we know what we mean. We could equate this to discretion. So here's the tension. Not writing a charge can feel worse than writing one, because in choosing discretion, the officer takes on emotional responsibility. So they're going to ask themselves, Will the inmate take this as a sign of weakness? Because remember, the rookies now is trying to establish a template. So they're very particular in what they want to let go because they don't want to be seen in long term as I'm weak and now they're going to step on me, because now you have this balance of how they're going to create their identity based on their actions, their behaviors. Will my peers think I'm being too soft? So there's judgment there. And what if this comes back to haunt me? So these are real, they're valid concerns. Discretion, true discretion isn't comfortable. It's a calculated risk based on observations, experience, and trust in your own presence. And for that reason, officers often hesitate. That's why leadership has to step in and shape how discretion is perceived. Now, Russ, how can leaders create a climate where discretion is valued and not quietly judged or second guessed by peers or supervisors?
I think that you really have to go the direct route with that, and so that happens within the confines of not necessarily formalized training, but just letting people know what you expect from them when they're handling the inmate population. I've had many a supervisor that was really really excellent at this, and they just say, hey, you know what, use discretionary decision making when you can, and if you don't get the results, then fall back on the pen. Things that were of a more serious nature, write those every time, even if it's going to be moved down. Sometimes one thing that we had discretion of when I was doing a hearing with an inmate, based on their record up to that point, I could always reduce a charge, and so that's part of discretionary decision making as well. And so I've had many lieutenants and sergeants tell me, okay, so this is how we're going to handle things. We can reduce charges if necessary, but in the end, on those serious things, those always get written. And so it's kind of like an unwritten policy at times, in that's the way that we go in and we set the tone for what we're doing in any given unit more as a team, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And for me, we kind of touched on it before, but basically you got to see it in action. You got to see it in action. The officers, the senior officers, the leadership, you got to showcase discretion as well, so the rookies can understand that discretion is part of strategy, and it's something that they should be leaning towards. And again, they have to understand how that discretion is applied. I'm not saying have a free for all, so don't start misinterpreting that, but you got to let them know that it is strategic, because I think the biggest fear they have is making the move and being wrong. And they got to understand that this is where trial and error comes in. Trial and error does come in through this effort. And that's where you tend to learn the most. All right. So now we got getting close to wrapping up. Let me delete this one banner. Now we get the next one. Discretion requires accountability. That's the key, just a different kind. So let's be clear. Discretion is not permission to ignore behavior. It's a decision to manage that behavior strategically. It's easy to fall into one of two traps: writing everything and losing influence, or writing nothing and losing control. And by the way, that's another thing, influence behavior. That comes with more of the established expectations. So this is what you should be shifting towards, that influence. Now, discretion exists in the space between those extremes. So let me read those extremes again. Writing everything and losing influence, and then writing nothing and losing control. So it means pulling an inmate aside instead of documenting on the spot. It means saying this doesn't go on paper yet, but it's noticed, it's addressed, it's on you now. And it means following up, watching, coaching, and if needed, reversing course. So there's a lot more effort in this than it wasn't just writing. Did you notice that just by this part alone? It just says discretion. It means following up, watching, coaching, and if needed, reversing course. So there's effort here in discretion, a lot more effort than you would find. I know it may not be seen on the surface, but 100% there's a lot more effort in utilizing discretion because it is long-term, it is more strategic, and there's a lot of processes that are happening that may not visibly be seen, but are happening. And discretion, when applied properly, does not reduce accountability, it deepens it. And that's a good thing to take note of. Because it requires the officer to maintain relational oversight, not just legal documentation, professional relational oversight. So, Russ, what are some? This is actually good. So, what are some good indicators that an officer is applying healthy discretion versus avoidance or complacency?
I'd say, the easiest thing to understand it in a concrete way is there actual accountability, not formal accountability, but is there accountability in the process? And if there's no accountability, the discretion is shit. But if there is accountability, then you're still, working within the bounds of, doing things at a good discretionary level versus just letting things take their course. And so that's the way that I would draw it out. Pure, simple, easy to understand.
Yeah, I agree. And again, guys, this is something that people do mature into. So I again, even if they make mistakes, you should be at a point where we talked about before where you can help them fix those mistakes. So you don't want them going too far where you can't fix it. But I think here where it goes, what are some good indicators that officers applying healthy discretion versus avoidance or complacency? The consequences of their actions, the consequences of their decisions, understanding their intent behind their decisions. What motivated that choice? Because again, when you're dealing with just the black and white, the absolute, the motivation could be simple: rule enforcement. But when you start to manage the gray of decision making, that is more strategic, the intent is different, because the intent is based on how you're adjusting to the situation in front of you. So now understanding their intent, where they came from, and more importantly, what was their long-term direction? What were they trying to do in the moment? And Russ, would you agree? I mean, if someone's reacting, I know it's just more about rule enforcement, setting their authority. But when you start operating within that discretion, I want to understand your intent behind the decision.
Yeah, I think that, discretion. Let's see, how would I put this? I would say that if you're using discretion properly, your span of influence with regards to the inmate population should increase. It's not necessary. I can't say that you can necessarily always achieve that because of the population that we actually do deal with. But I think that, when you're within that particular range of influence, you can actually become that person that is able to exert more influence than simply running things on paper. And it's something that you just kind of have to see and behold and actually experience and be able to do in order to be able to perceive how that thing is possible. And so, but that's why we're here. We're here to encourage rookies to learn how to do these things and not get caught up so much in the minutia of something that's completely formulaic.
Yes, and this kind of goes into the next part, because it goes, if the behavior persists, act. So this is kind of where you start to see patterns. So maybe you have something simplistic that's not worth the write-up, but it's part of a bigger pattern. And through time, you maybe you've documented it, and now it gets to a point where it has to be written. So if the behavior persists, act. So we're not telling you to, never write it. Maybe the first time you give a warning, they're not following through. Now we have to start to develop a pattern. Well, now you have to address the pattern, and that becomes a little bit more back to that reactionary style, but you're also more strategic in that, because now you know what you're trying to accomplish, because you have a balance of that discretion and your reactionary enforcement. So if the behavior persists, act. Okay, so discretion doesn't replace enforcement. It delays it when warranted. That's key. If the inmate does not respond to the chance, if the warning becomes noise, if the boundary gets tested again, then yes, write it up, apply the sanction, and make sure the message is clear. I gave you the opportunity. Now I give you the consequence. That's not backpedaling. That's structured accountability. I love that. That's structured accountability, because now we're at that point where I'm going to enforce it, because at this point your pattern is not where I need it to be. And inmates surprisingly respect that far more than the officer who writes everything without pause or purpose, because it shows that you were watching and that your judgment is flexible but not fragile. Now, Russ, this is a question here. What's the difference between giving someone a chance and letting someone manipulate you? How does an officer draw that line without becoming jaded or reactive?
I think, that just has to be a set of internal operating principles that you go by with respect to the population that you're over. You have to know that you're going to give the guy a chance. You give him a verbal warning, and then what comes next. If you don't already know what comes next, according to your own internal set of principles, then you probably shouldn't be doing things in a discretionary manner, because you're not really well anchored. But when you already know that, hey, you know what, I'm going to give this guy a break this time, but you know what, the next time he steps out of line, boom, it's all getting lowered, whatever that means. Maybe it's some kind of immediate taking away a privilege. Maybe it's an immediate write-up. Maybe it's whatever else that you have within your tool set. So when you know those things and they're already pre-planned out and you have internal guidelines, it's a lot easier to operate, and you don't have to worry about all this stuff about someone manipulating you. Because yes, we might get to the point where they're trying that manipulation, but boom, you already know exactly how you're going to act and react if they keep pushing that boundary.
Yeah, and Russ, I love what you said about the internal guidelines, because if you look at the extremes, if you live corrections in the extremes of enforcement versus being jaded. So if I don't enforce the rules at this absolute level, I'm going to be manipulated. That's a very tough way to move your career, because I think at that point you also have no control. I mean, yes, it could happen where you manipulate, but it doesn't mean you disengage. That means you become more engaged. That means, it's not universal precaution where people think, oh, you don't talk to anyone. No, you're engaged. You just got to know in the back of your mind that you have to have control of the situation. A lot of people will take that universal precaution and say, no, I write up everything because I'm not going to get caught up in manipulation. Well, you're still being controlled, just on the other side of that extreme. You got to find it in corrections. There is that middle road, and it takes courage to be in that middle road. But that's where the strength of your decision making comes in, because I can make this a very easy career. I could sit on the higher end of that absolute. I could sit on the higher end of that rigid extreme where everything is zero tolerance, and try to get ahead and manage a career that way. Will be exhausting, but be very simple in some extent, because I don't have to make decisions. It's been made for me. And I'll probably still have consequences to that, because not every decision that's written in policy is going to fit well to what you're working in. And maybe I do that because I'm afraid that if I open up an inch, that I'm going to get manipulated. So the policy becomes that shield, because I know if I'm not enforcing it, then there's a chance I'm going to be manipulated. Well, then you lack courage, because courage is the officer that walks in that middle, where they don't sit on the absolutes, where they make the decisions, but they keep control of that one of both sides in the middle. They're controlling both sides at all times, holding on to that wall so that it doesn't cave in. And that takes tremendous strength, because in the end, there's an art to that. There's a finesse to that. And in the long run, those are the staff members that make it in this career. I truly believe that. And here's the sad thing. They may not be the ones that you notice right away, but they're the ones that get called on, because at the end of the day, they make decisions that look to get the job done, and not decisions out of fear. Because ultimately, I do equate fear on both sides of that, because if you're extremely enforcing the rules to a point where there is no strategic discretion, and maybe you're afraid of making a decision that is not so defined by policy and procedure. And then maybe that's because you're afraid also that if you go the other route, you could be seen as soft and get manipulated. No, maintain control. Engage in the dialogue that showcases that you do have control, that you're not leaning on policy and procedure when you don't have to. Because if I was a supervisor and you've been in it for a little bit and I start seeing tons of write-ups again, I'd be like, hey, what is all this? Who's running your unit, me or you? Honestly, I mean, maybe a year ago this was all right, but when are you going to get over this? Because all this stuff means you're deferring the decision-making to me when some of this shit could have been handled by you. Okay, so the next one. We get almost wrapping up, Russ. I think there are 2 more parts. So I want to go over the internal dialogue of this stage. So this is what the rookie is thinking of when they're making that shift. So I'm learning that enforcement and leadership aren't the same, but they are related. I don't always need to escalate. Sometimes I need to observe and then decide. And then I'm not just enforcing rules. I'm shaping expectations. That's the long term. Now, Russ, here's the question here related to that internal dialogue. Which of these internal reflections do you think rookies struggle with most and why? So let me read them again. The first one, Russ, is I'm learning that enforcement and leadership aren't the same, but they are related. I don't always need to escalate. Sometimes I need to observe and decide. And I'm not just enforcing rules, I'm shaping expectations. Which of these internal reflections do you think rookies struggle with most and why?
I think it's the one about deciding to escalate, and that one should be the hardest one because there is something to be said for taking immediate action, and so sometimes taking immediate action is actually the solution in and of itself. Not so much what you do, but the fact that you do something immediately. So a rookie may not quite understand yet that there are times where you can wait because they're used to actually seeing things from that perspective of solving things immediately by immediate action alone. And so it's not always clear to them when that's permissible and when it's not.
Yeah, Russ, I agree. I was going to say actually the same one you were going to say. And the reason why I was going to say that is because when you're running through the reactionary, you kind of see the outcome a bit quicker. Doesn't mean it's the right outcome. It's just quicker. It's more immediate. But when you start to go into that strategic discretion, like Russ said, the action or the consequences behind that decision may be a little bit more delayed. And I think a lot of people, when they're kind of in this profession, when they're silent, we talked about this, there's a lot of ambiguity. So for most people, they rather at the very beginning get an answer now, get an answer now, get an answer now. I actually see a lot of people that still do that throughout their career where their answer now is not going to always be the right answer. So I think there is some patience that is required. And I think in that patience, people tend to get a little bit nervous. So I agree with you, Russ. I think I don't always need to escalate. Sometimes I need to observe and decide. And it's in that observation and decision that the person may think, I need to act. No, hold on. Be patient. Be more strategic. So imagine if I could draw a picture, Russ, tell me if this makes sense. You got the rookie who at the very beginning is running around, reacting to every situation, and then eventually gets to a point where a good peer or supervisor is going to catch them before they jump and hold them into that seat. Say, hold on. You may have to let this play out a little. What if it goes wrong? What about if I don't? I know you got really used to moving quick and getting immediate action, but we need this to play out a little bit. So sit down and let's see where this goes. And I think that is 100% correct. That could be very hard for a rookie to do, only because I relate to that. So this really does relate to who you are and what you relate to more. And Russ is definitely that person, because Russ was always fast action, But Russ, as you get older, fast action also becomes more strategic because you become more experienced. So you may see Russ acting quick, but Russ got long-term already as part of his conditioning. All right. So I think this is the last part. This is the last part. So what leadership can do to reinforce this shift. So leadership matters more in this phase than almost any other, because this is when rookies decide whether it's safe to grow. Now, mind you, guys, this whole book is available. You can get it right now. Let me just show you the picture again before we wrap up. And it's called From Reactionary to Reputation. There it is. It's on ebook. Just look up Anthony Gangi books and you'll see it. Let me just move this out. Let's go back to what we were discussing. All right, so here's what good leaders can do at this time. First, you ask instead of assume. Instead of did you write that, ask what did you decide and why. So now you're looking at more intent, because I think at the very beginning, the person's going to be chasing rules. So the intent is going to be rule enforcement. But as they start utilizing discretion and the actions are a little bit inconsistent to some extent because they're trying to find their consistency, you want to know the intent so you can build consistency from good intent. That makes sense to me. Protect discretion. If an officer made a good judgment call that other questions, support them publicly. Teach the gray. Talk about nuance in roll calls. Normalize that not every incident has a one-size-fit-all answer. And use real examples. Highlight when discretion worked and why. Let officers learn from each other's judgment and not just from their mistakes. So the question we got here, Russ, last one to wrap it up, is what does it look like when leadership fails to support the growth of discretion? And how does that impact long-term officer development?
So I would say that, when you have leadership that is trying to take discretion away, that is the actual definition of micromanagement. And so we see how that plays out time and time again in that when those tools of discretionary decision making are taken away, this is usually some type of an attempt to exert control in a way that generally does not need to be exerted. It showcases a lack of trust in your people. And it means that, you tend to be, territorial. You want all decisions to be run through you. And that's a really bad model to try and follow, because what you're going to do is you're going to stifle all decision making. And then you're going to have people who are going to fall back to the least common denominator, which is write up everything. Do not have any discretion. Only do A, B, and C. And you're going to completely destroy innovation. You're going to completely destroy motivation. And, the only exertion of actual leadership that you're going to show is what we get back to time and time again on this channel, which is that which is resting on your collar.
So true. I think Freya, we kind of discussed this already, but you got to support, discretion by utilizing it. Let them see it in action. Understand that they're still trying to work on who they are. So there's no judgment, more of a curiosity and why they made that decision. Understand their intent, and you want to cultivate, like Russ said, discretion, because these are the next leaders. I want decision making. I want innovation. I want to grow. I mean, right now we're evolving, we're changing, and we want people that know how to make decisions to be at those tables discussing how do we kind of blend where our future is going to be to a point where it benefits everyone that has a stake in it. So the last part here is the summary, Russ. There's really no question here. So I'll just read the summary and then we'll go right into our closing. So again, just talking about the shift, I utilize paper as a little bit more simplistic, but we know discretion is used throughout our profession in every area. The shift from paper to presence. This stage is the first true emotional and professional turning point. The officer begins to realize that writing the rule doesn't always change the behavior. And more importantly, the behavior change is the real goal. They're no longer reacting to instinct alone. They're choosing when to correct, how to respond, and what kind of influence they want to build. They're not abandoning policy. They're interpreting it with purpose. And that shift from reaction to reflection, from paperwork to presence, is the beginning of something powerful. Leadership through discretion. Not every officer will reach this point, but the ones who do will change the tier they walk on, because they aren't just enforcing, they're leading. That's powerful. Hey, Russ, what's your thoughts as we wrap this up? What's your closing?
I think that the thing that we have to really think about is that what we're doing is just are just population management programs, and a lot of different things go into those, obviously. the key point of the one that we've talked about today is, the discretionary decision making and the disciplinary process more specifically, or at least that's kind of what we've focused on. So when you start to think about things from that vantage point, this is just one element, and we really want to be able to tune things up and use things at the most efficient level, and doing things because they're required or suggested by policy and procedure is not efficient. It bogs things down. It puts us in a position where we can't be responsive to the inmate population as a whole, and it makes everything just a little bit more difficult. So, the supervisors out there should be trying to develop these skills in their officers, and they should be, providing that training, providing the modeling, and providing a robust form of discussion, whatever that may be. Be it at shift change, or be it in email or whatever. You have to be able to get this out there to your people. Otherwise, what you're left with is them developing it on their own, which is not very efficient. It will happen. We've got a lot of really smart people in corrections, but trial and error is a really slow-paced kind of thing. It's much better when they're able to, learn from past mistakes and learn from past successes, than it is for them to just go out and try and figure it out on their own.
And just for my quick little wrap up, guys, there are some people that may look at this video and saying you're making it a bit more complex than it is. No, we're not. We're not. We're managing the gap because this is the stuff that's happening that you may be passively learning, but if you don't have the right people next to you, you're not. So what we did really was label it. That's all we did. We labeled the next step in the transition. This is what's going on in that mind of that rookie, and this is what you should be doing to help them. This is everybody's gone through this. We've been through it. Myself, Russ, Joe, we've all gone through this, and this to me is something that's I think this is actually evergreen, because I can't picture this happening in any other way for a rookie in their effort to grow and be effective. I mean, you could always add, but I do see that there's these three major steps. There's the reactionary, the shift, and then ultimately the reputation, the established expectation. So again, this is part 3. So we will come up with part 4. Hopefully me and Russ will be able to bang out another one over this long weekend. I'll talk to Russ, see how Russ's schedule works out. And the next part is going to be that stage where you are a little bit more solidified in your decision-making, but there's still more to discuss, because that's only the 4th video. There's 10. So this process is definitely something that has a lot more than just something simplistic. When you work in corrections, there's nothing simplistic about teaching decision-making. As always, guys, the show is tipped. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe. Yeah, maybe I'll